Imagine you're a child living in this near utopian community. This community is everything that you know, and everything that you've learned has come from it. You stay there with all of your friends, the people that you live with, but you kind of lack a family. That's because your family is everyone around you. You have hundreds of brothers and sisters. You don't really have a parent. You only look up to this one person who you call your leader. And your leader's word is divine. And everything he says goes. This is the basis of a cult. Now, what is a cult? A cult simply means to follow, but in more recent decades has been solidified as a term used to describe a group of people following a person claiming to have direct lineage or contact with a higher power. The history of cults spans throughout mankind, depending on who you ask. People have put their trust into someone they thought to be divine for thousands of years. Humans are naturally attracted to power, and cults put that one person right at the top. The scientific community have classified some groups as cults as early as the 1930s by Howard P. Becker, a sociologist. In the past 100 years or so, we have seen a number of suicide or doomsday cults, which are groups who believe that their world is going to end or meet some sort of ultimate demise in some time or at a specific moment in their lifetime. Some doomsday cults opt not to wait for the end and participate in mass suicides, resulting in a major loss of life, sometimes voluntarily or involuntarily. It's always been a fascination of mine to see what motivates these people to follow someone into this. What goes on inside the mind of a cult leader and his or her followers. The psychology is really something worth looking at, but it also correlates with its history even more. There have been numerous suicide by groups throughout the century, but one has gained much notoriety throughout the past 50 years. This is the story of Jonestown. When Jim Jones left Indiana, he wanted to build a community of people not bound by the laws of government. He was a communist, but something that he could govern using the laws of God and an almighty power, and the laws that he used reading Karl Marx. He was also a proprietor in the integration movement and worked to have the institutions around him desegregated. Upon the threat of nuclear war, he traveled to Guyana to establish a safe haven from the nuclear threats he saw in America. Upon his return, he traveled to Northern California to start a new following. Mixing political views with religion, Jones was able to gain the support of many as he introduced new ways to worship to those who felt lost and confused in the current religious systems that they were in. With this move to the north, he brought more members and more new branches across California, and even gained the attention of politicians who would publicly speak in support of what was now called the People's Temple. His influences had reached extremely far, and his dinners were being attended by the governor's office and assembly people of California state. Upon media scrutiny, Jones traveled back to Guyana, bringing many of his supporters, over 850, in order to establish a place where they could freely practice their religion and political ideologies. He created an integrated environment free of discrimination, but also introduced the idea of translation, the idea that all of his followers and himself would die and live happily on another planet. Sadly, this was one of the few prophecies which Jones made happen. On November 18th, 1978, 909 people lost their lives either by forced suicide or by voluntary suicide. Jones made the decision after Congressman Jack Ryan was killed earlier that day while trying to board his plane after a visit to the People's Temple compound. The final 45 minutes was recorded, and in it you hear the deceptiveness of Jones as he convinces 9 people to take their own lives in order to protect themselves as a greater threat that Jones described. For the psychology of the followers, one never simply joins a cult. In the 70s, cults were around and people had heard about the dangers of them. There is an entire anti-cult movement that had been in effect years before. No one wants to admit that they can be taken advantage of, but some people live off that. It might not happen all at once. You won't get approached by someone saying, "Hey, you want to join a cult?" It'll happen over a period of time. Former cult members will say, they'll understand you better than anyone in your life ever will. These are usually people in some sort of crossroad in their lives, whether they have just gotten out of prison or trying to rid themselves of a harmful addiction. These are people who are still susceptible to the influence than others, more influence of others more so than other people. Those who are lost will hope to find their light somewhere, and sadly, some of them will find that light in a cult. When there is a person who is promising you literally a better world, someone from a low hope situation may take this and just run with it. The followers of Jim Jones were promised a socialist utopia free of segregation and oppression. Jones had already instilled confidence in his followers by being a proprietor of desegregation in California and Indiana. Gaining the support of politicians only made his cause seem more legitimate, because after many endorsements he gained the most amount of followers, and it was then he took them to Guyana. Jonestown was a place where people were not harassed because of their skin color or political affiliation. This, in my view, is what people loved in Jonestown, and what they loved in Jim Jones. But what made Jim Jones? As a young child, Jones was described as odd, weird, and obsessed with religion and death. He would read the theories and works of political and ideological radicals and study them. He often stood up for African Americans and in Indiana and labeled himself as a social outcast. It made sense that Jones sought after those who were oppressed in America. He used that oppression to his advantage and used his readings on Karl Marx to spread messages of social and political equalities in order to gain followers. It can be said that Jones was a sociopath who didn't really care much for his people but manipulation and getting his way. He was very good at getting his way, and this proved correct when he was able to gain support from not only average citizens but also politicians.